he shattered America with a single bullet. Yet nothing about John Wilkes Booth's story adds up. Why did a world-famous actor abandon fame for infamy? How did a kidnap plot morph into a president's murder? And why did his own allies call him a coward while he saw himself as a hero? Tonight, we expose 12 chilling contradictions that historians still can't explain. A doctor who swore he was innocent. A $1.5 million bounty ignored by thousands. A midnight escape through fog-soaked rivers toward his enemies. And a final stand so bizarre, it rewrote the rules of justice. This isn't the Lincoln assassination you know. This is the story they never wanted you to piece together, where every clue leads deeper into Booth's delusions and every fact hides a lie. But before we begin, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel to support our community. Upon Abraham Lincoln securing a second presidential term in 1864, John Wilkes Booth and his associates devised a scheme. They intended to abduct Lincoln, subsequently exchanging him with authorities for the liberation of captured Confederate combatants. They additionally prepared multiple backup strategies. A scheme sought to seize Lincoln during March of 1865 as he traveled by carriage. Yet an adjustment to the president's itinerary foiled that attempt. Another involved apprehending Lincoln inside Ford's Theater and hauling him down from his booth employing cords. Nevertheless, the Civil War was approaching its end, and Northern triumph grew ever more assured. Freeing prisoners would no longer alter the outcome, prompting Booth to opt for a far more drastic and bloody course. Murdering Lincoln constituted merely the beginning. Booth's complete scheme actually demanded an outcome resembling the finale of the film Casino. He and his co-conspirators planned to assassinate 4 crucial Union figures that evening. The additional objectives were Vice President Andrew Johnson, Secretary of State William Seward, and Union General Ulysses S. Grant. The concept involved plunging the entire Northern faction into disarray by eliminating its commanders. This allegedly would afford the Confederacy opportunity to reorganize and assault Washington. When the evening arrived, Booth utilized the access he gained as a performer to infiltrate Ford's Theater. Once Lincoln was engrossed in observing a drama titled My American Cousin, Booth accessed the box, drew a Derringer handgun, and at 10:15 p.m. shot Lincoln behind the head. Booth remained unaware then, but this murder would prove the solitary one among the 4 intended to truly achieve success. After discharging the lethal round, Booth hurried past onlookers and endeavored to jump onto the stage beneath. Henry Rathbone, a military officer, sought to halt him, yet Booth wounded Rathbone within the shoulder. Right afterward, Booth jumped toward the stage, landing badly, fracturing his leg. The theater spectators remained bewildered. Certain individuals believed the events formed part of the performance until they detected the First Lady shrieking. Booth rose upon the stage and screamed 3 Latin terms that would echo throughout history. Sic semper tyrannis, which translates into English as thus always to tyrants. Officially, he didn't coin that personally. The expression sic semper tyrannis was traditionally linked with Brutus and the murderers of Julius Caesar. Intriguingly, Booth had previously portrayed Brutus in a production. The motto was likewise the state slogan of Virginia. The president was deceased. The mood in the theater became chaotic. Troops filled the structure. Booth realized he must escape the Capitol immediately. A fellow plotter had organized a mount, awaiting him at the stage exit. Booth mounted the animal and traversed the Navy Yard Bridge into Maryland. Booth encountered on the opposite shore a conspirator called David Harold. They journeyed jointly to a settlement named Surrattsville, Maryland. There they visited Surratt's Tavern, whose owners were concealing provisions for the fugitives. Aware that the army would be in close pursuit, they remained only briefly. They collected necessary items, equipped themselves with weapons, and resumed traveling. At 4 a.m. on April 15th, Booth and Herold reached Maryland at the residence of Dr. Samuel Mudd. Mudd treated Booth's fractured leg and permitted both men repose at his house for several hours. Though Mudd was a rural doctor recognized for Confederate leanings, it remains uncertain if he recognized Booth and Herold or comprehended their deeds. He later disavowed awareness of the plot, but it helped little. Authorities dispatched him to prison regardless. Nevertheless, once sufficiently recovered, Booth and his comrade resumed travel. They wandered within a marsh and then compensated a farmer to guide them to Rich Hill, being the dwelling of a further Confederate sympathizer called Samuel Cox. Hindered by Booth's injury, the pair did not arrive until 1 a.m. the following day. Samuel Cox might have been sympathetic to Booth and Herold's plight, but he was also keenly conscious of the threat they represented to himself. More than 1,000 Union troops had been deployed to seek Booth, and a reward set for the conspirators totaled $100,000, approximately today's equivalent of $1.5 million. If Cox were captured aiding the fugitives, the penalties would prove severe. Aware of this, Cox dispatched Booth and Herold to a neighboring pine grove bordering his estate. That would grant them a vantage to scout for a chance to ford the Potomac into Virginia and grant Cox believable deniability if captured. Booth personally was enraged that Cox refused them shelter within the residence. Nevertheless, they remained within the grove and sought to adjust. Booth and Herold remained concealed within the pine grove for 4 full days. Periodically, an associate of Cox named Thomas Jones delivered provisions, beverages, and newspapers. Thus Booth initially discovered he was nearly everywhere denounced as a criminal and a craven. Having viewed his deed as heroic, Booth felt profound dismay. Within his journal, he likened himself to icons such as William Tell and Marcus Junius Brutus, questioning why he was deemed an ordinary assassin while they were hailed as champions. The diary's origin remains uncertain, yet this text stands as the sole primary record of Booth's reflections throughout this period. We learn from this journal that on April 18th, a detachment of Union troops marched within 600 feet of the pine copse. Fearing their steeds might betray them, Herold decided to quiet the creatures. 6 days after the murder, the troops seeking Booth departed the vicinity near Cox's dwelling. Thomas Jones notified the runaways, and at twilight on April 20th, they departed anew. Though the Potomac lay merely 3.5 miles distant, advancement was surely sluggish, owing to Booth's injury. Upon finally attaining the river, Jones placed both men inside a tiny dinghy. Declining remuneration for his aid, Jones launched them onto the water and separated from them. Regrettably for Booth and Herold, the evening proved misty, and steering proved challenging. Instead of reaching Muchadoc Creek in Virginia as intended, they became disoriented and wound up within Maryland. On the 21st, the escapees obtained provisions from a farmstead close to the creek. They went back to the craft where, for motives still ambiguous today, they remained inactive. Scholars conjecture Booth's leg might have pained him, or that both might have caught wind of reports regarding Union searches nearby. Yet certainty eludes history. All confirmed is that rather than fleeing along the Potomac as scheduled, the fugitives passed April 21st night at Nanjamoni Creek in Maryland. The fugitives set off anew the next evening. Fog persisted, yet now the mist aided their escape by cloaking their river descent. Booth's journal mentions a narrow escape. The small vessel strayed near a Union gunboat, though they dodged impact, and the fog concealed them. Simultaneously, Union troops drew the net tighter round the pair. In Maryland, Dr. Mudd's residence was encircled by soldiers, and the owners of Surratt's Tavern were arrested. The Army understood Booth was making for Virginia and commenced flooding its roads with troops. On April 23rd morning, the escapees attained Virginia. They promptly connected with a supporter named Elizabeth Queenberry, who provided sustenance before directing them to a Dr. Richard Stewart. They attained Stewart's dwelling successfully. Yet upon discovering their identities, Stewart expelled Booth and Harold immediately. Requiring refuge, they resolved to proceed toward the home of a freed black individual called William Lucas. Like Stewart, Lucas declined to host the fugitives overnight. Furious and hopeless, Booth menaced Lucas using a blade, compelling him and his relatives to pass the night upon their own veranda. The next day, Booth and Harold compelled Lucas's son to convey them to Port Charles. There, the fugitives encountered a prior Confederate soldier called Willie Jett. Jett proposed hiding the pair inside a residence he secured, yet the dwelling was inhabited by two unwed women. Lincoln's killer and his companion deemed it inappropriate to lodge there under such circumstances. Thus, they journeyed onward. On April 24th, Booth and Harold attained a farmstead possessed by Richard Garrett, unknown to them. Booth, likely employing his theatrical talents, persuaded Garrett that both were soldiers and Booth's limb was fractured during service. Garrett accepted the ruse and offered them overnight accommodation. The subsequent day, Booth slept late, drank heavily, and amused Garrett's offspring. By dusk, the household grew wary of the escapees and demanded they pass the night inside the barn. Booth consented and proceeded to his fresh quarters for repose. It would mark his ultimate rest forever. While Booth and Harold slept, Union forces approached. Willie Jett, the Confederate soldier who had attempted to aid their escape, had informed the authorities regarding the fugitives' location. Near 2:30 a.m. on April 26th, Booth was roused by horses nearing the barn. Cavalry had come. He awakened Harold, and both tried to flee. Unbeknownst to them, soon after they went to sleep, the Garretts, fearing the fugitives might take their horses, had secured them within the barn. They were confined. Union troops encircled the barn. They possessed orders from War Secretary Edwin Stanton to seize Booth living, so a standoff began. Harold pleaded with Booth to permit his surrender. Booth consented and released Harold, but reserved separate intentions for himself. As the stalemate wore on, Union soldiers commenced encircling the barn with kindling. Booth recognized they intended business, and his time dwindled. He endeavored to elude destiny by defying the Union commander to single combat for his liberty. But the troops dismissed it. The kindling was fired, and the barn erupted in flames. Booth lunged out and was instantly shot by a soldier named Boston Corbett. During his last moments, Booth begged a soldier to raise his hand so he might view it. The soldiers obliged, and while peering at his hand, Booth voiced his dying words, "Useless, useless." Then at 7:15 a.m., John Wilkes Booth perished. Booth died whispering, "Useless," but nothing about this manhunt was pointless. Because 160 years later, his story still hides 12 explosive contradictions. Why did Confederates he trusted betray him? How did a $1.5 million bounty fail? And why did Booth, a man who planned everything, get lost in 3 miles of fog? We've dissected the evidence, but history's greatest mystery remains. Was John Wilkes Booth a fanatic or a pawn? Think you've solved it? Drop your theory below. Was Dr. Mudd really innocent? Did Stanton let him escape? And why did Virginia, the state whose motto he shouted, abandon him to die? This isn't just history. It's a warning. How easily delusion becomes destiny. How one man's heroism becomes a nation's nightmare. Stay curious, stay questioning, and remember, the darkest truths are the ones still buried.